Technology developed most rapidly out of war. So the Romans, in the conquest of Gaul, had to build a wall to keep a tribe from Switzerland from interfering. And they built this magnificent wall, which can still be seen, running like 40 miles to keep them out. The building of these facilities allowed the building of roads, and that facilitated trade, movement, and so there was an intimate connection between the technological advance of the military We left when I was 6 months old, but I didn't speak English till I was much older, 7, because in my house only Hungarian was used. So my first language was Hungarian, but I had no memory of Hungary until I discovered Hungary again in the 1970s. They lived on Kozincica before the war, and after the war, Kozincica days. And it's very interesting that it is now chic and very sophisticated, because when we lived there, it was a slum. It was a very poor neighborhood.
Is a global war coming? Of course. There's never been a century that didn't have a global war. The 20th century you know about. 19th century is the Napoleonic Wars. 18th century was the 7 Years' War. We can go back and back and back and back. But if you don't think there's a global war coming, then you're saying that the 21st century is going to be the first century in which there isn't a global war. And I will bet against you any amount you want. In fact, global war, all war is sitting with you right now. It's sitting in your pocket. I present to you the iPhone. You've seen this. It carries such superb tools on it as YouTube and Tinder and all the essentials. And you guys are so cool that you know that this represents the future and makes you completely different because, well, you're cool.
I studied German philosophy primarily. I studied the Greeks, but it was German philosophy. I mean, there were things that I had to understand. I had to understand the Holocaust, and I couldn't understand it in the simple idea that men went crazy. It was more complex than that. So what was it in German philosophy? But I also wanted to study Marx. And I wrote some of my early works on Karl Marx because he was the enemy. So the Soviet Union was a Marxist state. Hungary was a Marxist state. I had to understand Marxism. And so my first work was on Marx and trying to, who was, by the way, a brilliant man, except that he was wrong about what would happen. But he really understood some of the important things about modern capitalism. When you read Marx carefully, you realize that his idea of internationalism, he doesn't mean. That he understands that, he wrote on the Austrian-Italian War. That was not an important war, but he understood nations. He understood that the Germans are different from the French and so on. And when you read it carefully, you will understand why socialism turns into nationalism. The Soviet Union, in the end, became merely an other nation that said it believed certain things. But from the beginning, when Lenin made his peace with the Germans, and the Germans had taken him to St. Petersburg, it was the nations that mattered, not the ideology. So Stalin in World War II had one interest: saving the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union it was called now. And many of the ideological things that he said he was using primarily to create terror in the country. But I learned that in the end, all the ideologies, all the beliefs of liberalism, everything, in the end, without a nation state that was yours, they meant nothing.
Foundation of this phone is a microchip. The microchip was developed to guide U.S. intercontinental ballistic missiles against Soviet targets. It had to have a small computer in it. It had to be very light. It had to be very accurate. And the microchip was the solution. And all of the weapons that we used during the Cold War to threaten the annihilation of humanity was built on the microchip. And you now use it today because it's cool. But that's what it is. Take a look at the other thing. You have a camera in your phone, the digital camera. That was developed by the U.S. National Reconnaissance Office for spy satellites. Problem we had was that if you took regular pictures with film, how do you get them to Earth? So you had to have a way to take pictures of targets of various sorts that didn't require you to drop a Kodak film pack down to the Earth, because that's what they did at the beginning. And they had to develop some sort of way to take pictures that could get back to Earth fast, just the way you send selfies to your mother or something. And that was the digital camera. It was driven by something called the CCD, which I remember the name once, but I can't remember what it's about. And what it did was it took digital pictures that could be beamed back to Earth to target people. Your innocent little camera had its birth in spy satellites. There's GPS. You love it. You walk around the street looking at it instead of the traffic. You get killed. It's a cool device. GPS was invented by the United States Air Force. It was called NAVSTAR, to guide cruise missiles to their targets and to allow Army units precision in their land navigation. In other words, it was invented to let soldiers know where they were. Okay? And it's the most dangerous thing you have in your device, because if you don't get hit by a car, you're going to crash yours while you're staring at it. So it has a violent nature. The Internet was developed by the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency to move classified data from one secret lab to the other. So something in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the lab's there, we moved to Los Alamos, and that would be moved to Brookhaven National Laboratories. And what were they doing in these laboratories? Doing research on nuclear wars, because that was the big story then. It was developed with only one thing in mind: to make research more efficient. And when you get on the internet, all the protocols you get and all the cool stuff that gets you around were developed by American scientists who were deeply involved in the Cold War.
The United States entered into a confrontation with the Soviet Union in the late 1940s. And the Americans and the Russians constantly thought about war with each other. There are various ways of thinking about war, but one of the ways was the idea of designing what the Germans called Kriegsspiel, war games. And what happened was that when I was young, in 1972, computers became available. So it was the PDP-11 of Digital Equipment Corporation. It was the first computer that we used. And what we tried to do was collect the order of battle with this. What are all the units of the Soviet Army? Where are they located? What equipment do they have? And everything else. So from this, an interesting problem arose, an intelligence problem. If I say, how many times could a Soviet T-54 tank fire? The answer would normally be 2 or 3 times a minute. Well, a computer does not understand 2 or 3 times a minute. It understands 2, 3, 2.4, whatever. It is a stupid machine. We didn't have enough precision on Soviet capabilities because the kind of information that was gotten was the type that was appropriate. 2 or 3 times is just fine. But the war game needed specificity because it was a mathematical model. So suddenly you had to find out how many times it fired. So one of the ways to find out is to go there and watch it fire. 1, 2, 3, whatever, you know, the clock. And as you recall, as you recall that here in Hungary, you may not recall, I'm sorry, that here in Hungary they had some of the major war games. The Russians had maneuvers. They were headquarters in Székesfehérvár, and that was their center, and they would operate. So here we could send people who could pass as Hungarian or what have you, and observe. And the Russians sent people to observe ours, so it was no big thing, but we needed to know precise numbers. Now, the war game that was designed was extremely sophisticated and got even more sophisticated later on, but it became an interactive game between intelligence and mathematics. And every time the mathematics got better, the intelligence had to improve.
Bottom line is, there is nothing in this phone, or if you're a religious fanatic in the Android, there was nothing in this that was not created for war. So you think about war as a distant thing. You think about war as something that doesn't really have to do with you. And then you pick up this phone, and every bit of it is drenched in war, in fear of war, and everything else. Now, the Americans are peculiar. In the United States government, they're not allowed to have patents. Basic rule is, if the US government invented it, and it's not secret, it's yours for the taking. It's an odd rule, but it works for us. It means that everything we do in preparing for wars, designing aircraft, everything else, ultimately comes down to being available.
On the one hand, you have this enormous power of the United States. On the other hand, a complete unpredictability because there is no operating principle. We're too young. This is not different from the Roman Empire in the early days. This is no different from the British Empire. I mean, the British were defeated by a third world country, the United States, in a war, crushed in a war. They survived. They recovered. We are in that position. So the two things that came out of that book that I think are most relevant here is the power of the United States and the idea that the European Union couldn't survive. That there was a contradiction between retaining the nation state and creating Brussels and trying to reconcile these two things.
Steve Jobs, who is so cool, invented nothing. He took other people's inventions from the government, put them together, and the only thing he invented was marketing. And that was pretty cool. Bill Gates invented nothing. MS-DOS was a program he bought from someone that had originally been developed for the Air Force. Zuckerberg invented even less. Your whole generation lives in a fantasy of creativity. The basic tools that guide your life, that permeate you, were developed by warriors or scientists of warriors. It got to you, and a bunch of really smart marketing guys put them together and convinced you they were geniuses. The real geniuses made $50,000 a year and retired poor.
How much of the American scientific development came from Hungarians? You know, the computer, but not just Hungary. I mean, I go to Lithuania. I have a company that works for me in IT. It's from Estonia. So this is, in the world, this is the most underdeveloped, yet most intellectually capable region. Most underdeveloped countries, you have to work to develop the capabilities. Here, you simply have to work to harness them. And the problem is, each of your economies is too small. So, you don't need a European Union with Portugal. This region is going to have a bloc, a union, because then you have scale, where Polish and Hungarian and Romanian work together. You have common political interests, you have common economic possibilities. So long as you are linked into a world where German exports, the cost of them determine the dynamic of your lives, you can't do anything. When you accept the idea that, and this is the hardest idea of all Eastern Europeans, you're on your own. There is no one who's going to help you. When you accept this idea of self-reliance, can Hungary with 10 million people develop? No. Can I do it with Slovakia? Please. Can I do it with Germany? They'll eat you up. Can you do it with the Russians? They'll steal your money. Who can you do it with? The Poles, the Romanians. Now, you have problems with the Romanians, I understand. I'm also not interested. I'm interested, from my country's point of view, in the political, military, economic bloc that exists here. So I will predict that for Europe, at least, in this century, Eastern Europe will become what Central Europe was in the 19th century.
Russia is in decline. Germany exports 50% of its GDP. Half of its economy depends on its customers buying. And right now, its biggest customer is the United States. And we have a crazy president who doesn't like Merkel, and he's capable of anything. When you're as big as the United States, you can make stupid moves and get away with it. With all of this rising and falling, you think there won't be war? Well, the world is filled with war right now. You may disapprove of it. There may be a poll that says it should stop, but it won't. Merkel, by the way, said after being insulted by Trump, well, we've had enough, we're going to defend ourselves. Thank God, finally. Why she thought the United States would be offended at the thought of not having to defend Germany is not clear. But how does Germany, exporting 50% of its GDP, survive? 10% loss in exports is a 5% loss in GDP, which, to put it in technical terms, means they're screwed. So what you have here is a declining power, Russia, a declining power, Germany, and a country in the middle that's not doing too bad, Poland. And that's how you figure who's going to be there. Now, is Russia going to go quietly into that good night? I think not. Is Germany going to say, oh, well, you know, we'll be unemployed again, 30%? No, that's not Germany's style. Is Hungary going to be once more, as in all of its history, caught in a great conflict that it has no control over? Yeah, you're only 10 million people and nobody cares about you. Is Hungary going to wind up on the wrong side of the war? We've had a perfect record so far. And this is your lies. Will you live your life out till the end of the century, as many of you might, without war, without death, without suffering? You're living in a fantasy world. That's not how the human condition works.
In every generation, young people have plans for their lives. In just about every generation, they're planning events change the lives they expect to have. And that one of the most common things that does that is war. And that war has not been abolished. It is not something that happens far away. It will occur. And so the expectations of what your life will be like and what it is different. So I'm sure that our parents, grandparents, so on in the 1930s never expected their lives to be what it was. When we look at history, the gap between what will be and what people think it will be is enormous. So that's my basic position.
Before World War I, everybody thought Europe could not have a war because of interdependence. The Germans and the French traded so much with each other. A man called Norman Angell wrote a book saying the great illusion that there could be a war. He was a very smart guy. He was dead wrong. I wish he'd been like 21 in the trenches, dead wrong, but he didn't get to go. The warning that I have to you is that war lurks in your life everywhere. The output of the war. And you can pretend this is an innocent, harmless tool, but every piece of it was designed to kill or to help killing. It's just true. It also means that you're going to have to face the fact that the odds are, since it's been 70 years since the last systemic war, that's not going to be another 70 years before the next one.
When you feel safe, this is the most dangerous period. Always be mature, always be careful, always enter into relationships that benefit you, and not because the Messiah is going to come and solve all your problems.